I'm Nick Corso, and I'm a potter, and I start with a raw piece of clay, and I throw pots. Throwing on the wheel is a really complicated process, but it's really simple on the surface. First, I'm spiral wedging the clay in a spiraling motion. It works out all the lumps and gets all the air bubbles out of the clay and turns it into a nice homogeneous clay body that's ready to be thrown on the wheel. It's really important because it also aligns the particles of the clay. And if you don't align the particles of clay, then it gets all out of whack and all lumpy, and it can stretch in uneven ways. Centering is a really interesting process because to center a really good piece of clay, you have to be able to center yourself first. So there's certain hand motions to it, and it takes a certain amount of strength, but really what it takes is a certain amount of centering in your mind to be able to center the clay in the right way. So I open the clay with my fist. Of course, the clay is really nice and wet and slippery. You can't make a nice pot from really dry clay or too wet clay. So that's another important aspect, is a really careful balance of putting the right amount of water on the clay. As the wheel turns, the centripetal force from the spinning wheel always wants to pull the clay out. So I'm always working with that centripetal force and keeping the clay in. The second pull is where I get lots of the height from my cylinder. So I put my thumb under the clay and I push the clay in from the bottom with my knuckle. And I also squeeze the clay from the inside with my left hand. And I pull the clay up really carefully, as tall as I can. And usually, that motion there, I'll get almost all the height out of my pot. I usually shape down. With my left hand inside, I push the clay out, and I can shape the clay into a beautiful shape. I make all my pots, and I put the handles on, finish the lids, and then I do one thing that's really different than what a lot of people do right now, and that's I do raw firing and raw glazing. Glazes are also very important on handmade pottery because I can experiment with color and texture of the glaze and the surface of the glaze, how it reflects the light. I can vary all those things with the different ingredients that go into the glaze. So after all the pots are ready, I store them all in my rack, right behind my glaze buckets. When the rack gets about 3/4 of the way full, I know I have enough stuff for a firing. It takes about 100 to 120 or so pieces of pottery, depending on the size, of course, to fill the kiln. And I separate them all by their height, and I put them on the shelves along with all the other pots that are the same height. It takes about 10 hours, I would say, to load the kiln. It's really, really exciting every time I get ready for a firing, because I spend a lot of time in between firings planning and preparing for the next firing, so it really builds a lot of anticipation. I start a nice small fire, and that just dries all the pottery out, lets all the moisture out of the kiln. It's really important at this point not to build a raging fire, because really large fire with long flames, the flames will go into the chamber and they'll crack the pot.
As the firing progresses, I'm putting a piece in probably every 3 to 5 minutes. A continuous, steady flow of wood. So in between, I'll be stacking wood and preparing wood for the day, or I'll be sitting and playing my banjo or just passing the time.
So I'm bringing the temperature up at about 150 degrees an hour. When the kiln reaches about 1200 degrees, it starts to have a little bit of red glow to it, just the slightest tint of red. And it's at this point that the pots become pyroplastic. It's safe for the flames to pass up and onto the pots without the flame cracking the pots.
And at that point, I go through different stages like reduction. Might do a body reduction that affects the glazes, the glaze surfaces, and mostly the glaze color. Then I'll bring the final temperature up to 2400 degrees. Overall, the whole firing process lasts between 16 and 20 hours. So the firing's finished, and so I let the kiln cool for the next 2 or 3 days.
In a few days, I can come back and open the door and see what treasures I have. It's like opening presents on Christmas.